the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport for hosting this webinar and letting VEV come along and talk to you along with our guest John from AV Dawson. And thank you all for taking your lunch break to be with us today. It's a great time to speak to you, and I hope you're enjoying your lunch while you're listening to this and being part of this. Today we're talking about electrification and how it can offer real business advantage and how you can get started. I'm Rachel Kemp. I'm in the marketing team here at VEV. And for those of you who don't yet know VEV, we are a fleet electrification specialist. We help some of the biggest operators of heavy fleets move to smarter transport. We work across organisations running fleets that move people, goods and waste. That's bus companies, logistics businesses, waste operators, and even organisations that do a combination of all of those, airports and ports, for example. We help them start, scale and operate their electric fleets, providing consultancy, analysis, planning, infrastructure, software, energy and funding. It's a long list. Before I introduce you to the people that are joining me for this webinar, John and George, I'd like to ask you to put in the chat function if you can and tell me where you are on your electrification journey now. So if you just go into the chat and just tap in where you are. Are you curious, just starting out? Have you started and stopped? Or are you about to finish? It'd be great if you could just jot in your current situation. Just using the chat, or I think there's a Q&A section as well. Thank you, Katrina. You're looking into your requirements. We hope we can help with that, understanding more on how we can assist customers in moving to EV HGVs. So while some of you are thinking about that, let me just pass over to our two experts, John and George, to introduce themselves. John, would you like to go first?
Yeah, of course, Rachel. Well, it's very nice of you to call me an expert. I'll leave you to be the judge of that after this conversation. But my name's John Booth and I'm Head of Sustainability and Quality at AV Dawson in Middlesbrough. And for those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, we're a third-generation family-owned business who own and operate the Port of Middlesbrough. And as well as the port operations, we have a separate subsidiary business called AV Dawson Transport, who have a fleet of around 37 44-tonne HGVs.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. And George?
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Hi, guys. Nice to meet you. My name's George. I'm VEV's data lead, which means I look at the upfront requirements for what fleets need to go EV without any operational pain. And then also once they've already gone EV, I kind of review their existing operations and look at how they can either optimize their current EVs or deploy functionality that will make future vehicles easier to electrify.
Thank you, George. That's wonderful. Now, let's see if you can put some more in the chat function. We'll see how this goes because we had two before. So let's see if people want to tell me what their biggest challenge is with fleet electrification. What do you consider to be your biggest challenge? And if you just drop it in the chat, that'd be great. And whilst you're doing that, I just cost. Well done, Jessica. Thank you. I'm going to share a presentation before we get into the nitty-gritty of this webinar with George and John. But whilst we're on this, do just stay on mute. And if you put any questions into the chat, that'd be great. Finding charging points, another challenge, and the infrastructure. This is great. I think we're going to touch on lots of these as we go forward. Our panel discussion should touch these, and if you think of more while you're on this session, just drop them in. If we can address them, we will. If we have to pick them up at the end, we can, or indeed, of course, we can talk afterwards. This session is here for you guys to take away lots from what we've learned with working with AV Dawson, and hopefully you will get lots of your questions answered. So I'd like to share a quick perspective on the wider benefits of electrification in transforming logistics. Today's focus for most businesses, regardless of your sector, is profitability and compliance. And one of the biggest trends in recent years has been the drive to operational efficiency. which has been unsurprisingly led by digitalisation. Digital transformation is now deeply embedded across industries. Smart meters delivering real-time energy insights, NHS wearable technology, and digital health platforms monitoring patients remotely. Manufacturers are using it to have digital twins to simulate and operate production workflows before even making the physical changes. Fundamentally, digitalisation unlocks operational efficiency, and it's time for your fleets to reap the benefits of that and everything that comes with it. And electrification gives us that capability. Ultimately, it will give you greater automation, unlocks the future for autonomous transport, and is something that we need to jump onto now. Putting it simply, modern logistics runs on data, not just diesel. Telematics, AI, and real-time visibility gives operators full control over their fleets, reducing costs, improving utilisation, and increasing reliability. Dynamic route optimization means fewer empty miles. Predictive maintenance means lower downtime. Smarter planning means leaner, more resilient operations. The result is simple: higher margins, better service levels, and more flexible capacity. That's where electric fleets come in. They don't just replace diesel, they enable smarter operations. And that's why we're here today, really, talking about how we can make that happen. EVs generate richer, cleaner telematics data and can be integrated into systems to optimize usage, cost, and carbon. Fuel maintenance costs are lower, which will pick up on some of these chat comments, over the life of the vehicle, and there's no more manual processes. EVs allow easier integration with other digital tools. VEV has its own proprietary platform that is a smart charging platform that optimizes vehicle charging, scheduling, and energy use. The result: simpler, more efficient fleet to manage. And like we like to say here at VEV, it's better for business, better for people, and the planet. So together, electrification and digitalisation creates a flywheel effect. The digital tools make EVs fleets cheaper and easier to run. EV fleets make digitalisation more powerful and measurable. Combined, they drive the cost savings, service improvements, and emissions are cut simultaneously. It's operational efficiency. It's a strategic shift that positions operators to meet net zero targets, cut costs, increase competitiveness, build more resilience, future-proof fleets. And we're hoping during this session today, we can pick up on how that is happening and what we can see the future holds. Because digitalisation makes fleets smart and electrification makes them better. Together, they give logistics operators a clean, commercial, operational and environmental edge in a sector under intense cost and carbon pressure. But why have we made this decision to talk about it now, and why do we think that you should start now? Lots of this you've all probably considered, but it's a great reminder to think about how we can maximise the benefits of this. If it really is a strategic decision, then why is it important right now? Customers demand it. That's the first one. Zero emission fleets win more contracts and meet Scope 3 targets. We're already hearing that Scope 3 emissions with targets are baked into tenders, and those operators that can respond to those are likely to win. Regulation is tightening. UK ZEV mandate, clean air zones make diesel more expensive to operate. Regulation is fast going to mean new vehicles will just have to be electric and not diesel. Government incentives are available but time limited and often on first come served basis, so you have to move quick. Infrastructure is scaling fast. That was also mentioned on one of the chat things, and it's early movers secure grid access and avoid future bottlenecks. Early adopters lock in savings, secure market position, and future-proof their fleets. But we know that adopting new technology making a shift, you do have to overcome some perceived risks, like the operational risks that you're showing here, the financial risks, and the strategic risks of making this move. It is not as simple as just saying we're just going to move to electric. So that's why we brought John and George onto this webinar to talk to you, to start talking about how we address the challenges you've raised and indeed help you to reap the benefits of electrification for business advantage. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to bring George and John to the forefront so that we can start this conversation together. Oh, there's lots of things. So John, I think I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
What prompted you to start looking at electrification and why?
That's a brilliant question, Rachel. For those on the call, I obviously mentioned a little while ago that we have a subsidiary business, AV Dawson Transport, and around 37 44-ton diesel HGVs. Now, if we look at the entire AV Dawson group, they represent over 80% of our total Scope 1 emissions, which just from the HGVs. So if you look at all of our port operations, all of the harbour cranes, all of the large fork trucks and handling equipment, the actual HGVs are over 80% of our Scope 1 emissions. So by far and away, the biggest bang for the buck, if you like, is if we can do something to address that. And electrification feels like the way the industry is going, and certainly is something that we were interested in exploring to see if we could make them work for part of our fleet.
Fantastic. And when you were doing that, John, what was the biggest consideration you needed to think about internally? Were there things you had to overcome?
Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism, or there was a lot of skepticism, I should say, internally anyway. I mean, we've been going as a business for 87 years in various different, 87 years, and have expanded over that period, and have had trucks for going back probably 50 odd years. So they're very well rooted in diesel. They understand it, they're comfortable in it. The way our transport team plan is in quite a traditional way. And I think with a 44-ton diesel truck, it gives you ultimate flexibility to put it on any job without really thinking too heavily about how to optimize how that particular truck is used. And for us, though, there was the typical questions of range. That was one that people always like to throw range at you. Payload, which was one of and remains one of the bigger challenges, depending on what it is that you move as an industry. So a lot of what we transport is steel and is heavy. So that was one of the interesting challenges that we wanted to try and overcome. And the cost element. I know someone in the chat there, Jessica, you mentioned cost. And cost is definitely a significant factor. And before we started discussions with VEV, cost, we very much had in our head, well, it's going to be too expensive. We're probably not going to be able to progress with electric trucks. But if you maybe consider things differently, and I'm still working on our business to try and consider it this way, and look at that total cost of ownership over a period of time, rather than the upfront cost of purchasing that truck, then it starts to make a lot more sense. And historically, we have always purchased the trucks, and then at the end of, I think we used to keep them for 5 years now. Typically, we keep them for 7, although we might be going back to 5. But typically over that period, we've still got an asset left at the end, and which we can then sell on and purchase new trucks. With electric, that was a little bit more uncertain. But when you consider over that duration, as the trucks get older, the maintenance costs generally go up. Certainly, as we've been keeping them for 7 years, for the last 2 years of that vehicle's life, they're outside of the typical maintenance contracts that we would have otherwise agreed, which usually expire at 5 years. So the costs associated with those vehicles, the fuel economy of those vehicles starts to decline as the mileage increases as well. I think electric goes a long way to addressing a lot of the concerns, but there was definitely a degree of skepticism within the business before we trialed a vehicle.
Yeah, and John, funny enough, I'm not surprised, because we do hear that a lot from the market as well. And that's why I think, George, maybe you can talk about how you helped John and his team address some of this, and how you helped with message it internally and overcome some of those perceived challenges that we're seeing with fleet electrification.
Well, first of all, I do like to think I did help before I put words in John's mouth. But what What I think was the most important thing, and John, maybe I'll let you jump in and see if I'm right here, was that we based it all entirely on AV Dawson's previous operations. So we looked at 6 months of previous telematic data in total. We ensured that we looked at both the available grid capacity and space at the sites where they would be deploying the electric truck, because it is very likely that you can electrify 10-20% of your fleet today with very minimal change. So what we wanted to do was show AV Dawson that there was a route where they could start now and their operations wouldn't be at risk. There was a path to TCO parity, although that kind of comes out, obviously, if you're looking over a 7 to 10 year life cycle. But primarily there was a way for them to get started without risking any of their operations, which apart from cost always seems to come up as the second biggest consideration for fleets we talk to. So and then the only other one is that there's EV trucks and actually vans as well have improved dramatically from a technical perspective in the last few years. The second generation trucks now, you're looking at something with a 500 to 600 kilowatt hour battery. You could easily get 300 plus miles from it as well. So it's the technology's improved since. So if your first introduction to EV technology was 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's definitely worth going back around now and looking what the technology can achieve, because that kind of legacy tech within EV is now being completely overcome. So not only will your operations might be more ready than you think, but the technology available is significantly better. And then I think the only other one that sometimes people don't consider up front is the people element. It's really important to chat to the person who will be driving the truck before they even get a new set of keys. And I think, John, one of the greater things that you helped with was we were able to meet your drivers, understand their concerns, and then not only talk to them about the new technology, but show them using your own data that actually range anxiety wasn't going to be a problem for the routes we were considering deploying the truck on.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. And sorry to jump in, Rich. I was just going to say, completely agree with what you said there, George. And we deliberately, when we did a pilot, which I know we'll probably be talking about as we go through this, without wanting to spoil the surprise for anyone on the call. But we tried to choose the drivers who were maybe the most reluctant and resistant to change, or the most skeptical, shall we say, about EV trucks. And again, we'll touch on the kind of outcome afterwards, but it was really enlightening to then speak to them both beforehand and then after the pilot, and sort of discuss the contrast between their initial point of view.
Excellent. Just to pick up on some of that, George and John, you obviously looked at lots of data and analysed lots of the vehicles. What were the key things you found when you were doing that?
I think if I go first, George.
Yeah, so it's always really interesting because I like to look at the data without being led by the client. So I kind of play back to John what I think is his opportunity to electrify, and then whatever I interpret from data will never ever beat a fleet director's local knowledge about what their fleet does. So it's really important you co-create what your first wave of EV looks like. So not only is it based on what the data tells us and what we know technology can achieve, but also takes into consideration what the fleet knows from years of operating it successfully. So I think the main things we found with AV Dawson's data, which was interesting, was 70% of their operational days could have been completed on one charge if you went for the larger battery technology HGVs in the market. But then there was lots of opportunities for top-up charging. So a kind of ideal use case for an EV is a vehicle will go out and complete maybe a between 70 and 150 mile trip, return to the depot to collect more goods. But that is not a 2-second turnaround, especially when you're talking about loading up a 40+ ton truck, right? There's an opportunity there for you to recharge the vehicle, not only to give the driver more confidence, sees a higher range therefore when he's on his afternoon shift, but also that lets you optimize costs in the future. You can drop the battery spec. You don't have to go for the 600 kilowatt hour battery if you can opportunity charge your vehicle. And then with the improvement in battery technology as well, we've seen that there is very, very limited battery degradation. So even adopting that slightly more intense operating cycle is probably the right word. That's a really good path to optimize in the future from a cost perspective. So it's really interesting to see that from the first set of data analysis we looked at with John and the rest of his team, there was not only a path to take EVs immediately, but to optimize pretty soon after they've got some operational confidence in the EVs.
Was there anything you wanted to add to that, John?
To be honest, I think George summarised that very nicely. I think
Fantastic.
Just to kind of echo the point that I think the fact that all of the discussions we had and all of the analysis that George and his team conducted was based on our data was really beneficial, and that was key to getting the buy-in of the team. Not just saying the truck can do 300 miles, it'll be fine. It was the fact that it was planned, and we managed to prove what the truck could actually do. And throughout the pilot, managed to overcome those myths about range anxiety and everything else that was kind of thrown at it, all of that skepticism that was thrown at the truck in advance. I think the one other aspect that people need to maybe consider, and it's something that George worked on with the team throughout the pilot, but is how we plan the trucks as well. So in terms of working with the planners as well as the drivers to make sure they're comfortable with what they need to do, and maybe plan a little bit smarter, which touches on the presentation that you made, Rachel, at the beginning of this session as well.
Brilliant, thank you, John. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, George, was around total cost of ownership, and how much we put on that, and how important it is, and how that helps with the conversations like John has internally, and the things you're having when you speak to customers.
Yeah, of course. It is my favourite topic of conversation. So Rachel's probably bored of hearing me talk about it. So very, very polite of her to say that it's interesting still. I think the ability to adopt an EV operationally is kind of that myth's gone at the moment. The fleets could take a significant portion of EVs today. However, the upfront cost of them is significantly more expensive. So you don't have, so it's not as simple as just buying a new truck and then hoping you'll have a long-term benefit as you operate that over its full life cycle. But if you design a solution holistically, there is a path to TCO parity for not every use case at the moment, but I think that will come in the future, but definitely a subset of your fleet operations now. So it's all about looking at that vehicle, what that vehicle needs to do. So as I said before, right sizing battery and vehicle spec is really, really important because you bring that upfront CapEx cost down. Looking at what actual charging solution you require for that vehicle. Some people are tempted to go push in a 200 kilowatt hour charger when they've got a 9-hour charging window overnight. That's going to lead you to having even higher upfront CapEx. But also considering long-term plans, if you put in more powerful charging, you can charge more of your fleet on off-peak energy tariffs, which can cut your electricity bill by 15 to 25%, depending on the tariffs you're on now. You've also got to look at the grid capacity that you've got available. Grid upgrades are very expensive, but if you do the right number of trucks, they can carry that cost for you. So what people might like to do is look at phasing their first wave of EVs so they can charge under your current grid capacity, learn, get confident, and then see just how much extra grid you would need to do your full wave of trucks. Driver training, absolutely vital. The more miles per kilowatt hour you get out of the EV, the faster it will pay off. I think some of the most recent heavy truck analysis I've looked at is you could save between 20 and 40p a mile, again, depending on your diesel price and your efficiency. But driver training is really key to that. It's every percent of extra efficiency you can help your driver achieve, the faster that payback rate becomes. And then the other one is potentially on-site renewables. If you have an operation that enables you to charge in the day directly from solar generation, it improves TCO massively. So I think it has to be looked at holistically. If you are expecting the EV just to kind of carry the weight of TCO by itself, you're unless you're very lucky, you might be disappointed. But looking at everything holistically from day one means you can plan your future pathway to not only a 100% EV fleet, but a cost optimized EV fleet. And that's what I really believe will accelerate the UK's EV transition.
Fantastic, George. Thank you. And how did we do that in a trial with John and AV Dawson? How did we make that happen to start looking at that? What did we do?
As in how we scoped out the trial, sorry, Rachel?
Yes.
I think one of my favourite bits of that was when it was the end of the presentation I gave you, John, to try and convince you to do it. And it was either yourself or your colleague who just looked across the table, pointed at me and go, well, you sound convinced, so let's give it a go. Which, I'm not going to lie, did make me go back and recheck every bit of data analysis I had ever done. But I think the way we got there was just Rachel going along the journey with John and AV Dawson. We identified they were keen to try it, which was great. Then we helped them understand their operations were suitable for it. There was a path to going full EV. There's no point doing a trial if you can't adopt the vehicle relatively soon after. And then I think what I enjoyed about it was just the co-creating it and then making sure that we stayed in constant contact through the pilot so that we were able to give you almost real-time data insights, optimize it throughout, and then plan the right jobs for the EV. What's a really useful thing to do with a pilot if you've only got the vehicle for a couple of weeks is you want as much out of it as possible. So we scanned AV Dawson's operations for the type of operations they do, different deliveries, different customers, to make sure we ticked off as many of those use cases as possible. So even though it was a 2-week trial, what you might have done is prove that between 40 and 60% of AV Dawson's jobs could be done as an EV.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, it was an extremely collaborative process, as you've just alluded to, George, and that support that was given to the planners throughout, well, prior to and during the trial, as you said there, George, where you were giving the almost real-time data on the truck and the performance. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure we saw the performance in terms of mile per kilowatt improve slightly throughout the pilot as we went on and as the drivers became more comfortable and familiar with how to drive that truck. I mean, I would just say as a quote from our driver at the beginning, I think he called it a sports truck. Correct me if I'm wrong again, George, because he said that when you set off, I think he called it a driver's truck and a sports truck. When you set off, it's like it's unladen, because of the power and the torque that vehicle has compared to diesel. And they were blown away by the truck. I know he didn't want to give the keys back at the end of the pilot, and as mentioned just a little while ago today, that he was probably one of the more skeptical people, certainly out of the driving group, prior to the trial starting as well. But just on that point you mentioned as well about the batteries and optimizing the actual truck to the operation. And I think that's a really interesting point because I mentioned payload. Well, depending on what it is that you are actually moving, if you have a depot model where you are, like we are in a lot of cases, we act as a northeast distribution centre to a lot of our customers. So we might bring product in to us by rail or by sea, and we might then distribute it in the northeast in a vicinity of our depot. And we base the pilot around depot charging, so the vehicle coming back to the depot, charging overnight because we didn't double shift it for the purpose of the pilot. But if we wanted to carry heavier payloads, there is the potential that, well, we proved arguably throughout that pilot that we didn't need as large a battery as we had, or as big a number of batteries in that particular truck as we had. We could have potentially dropped a battery pack, increased our payload, reduced our range a little bit, but we could have still, through the work that George and the team did looking at the telematics data, proven that truck could have worked, and it might have unlocked even more runs potentially just because of that increase in payload. So really brilliant collaborative process, and I would strongly encourage anyone to get in touch and discuss that if they're interested for their own fleets.
Thanks, John. That's excellent. I love the way we collaboration is such a simple thing, but sometimes overlooked, isn't it? Right. So it's the way you work together and the way you communicate, which really brings this sort of thing to life. So we've heard what you're saying about collaboration and speaking to people and speaking to VEV as well, of course. But if you were just talking to anyone on here now about what really you'd say to them about starting out on their fleet journey, what's your top tip, I suppose?
Ooh, if I had to boil it down to one.
Well, you can do 5 if you'd like, but you know.
Oh, right, okay, well, it's gone now. I'm proposed. My top tip would be discuss it with the likes of VEV and arrange a trial. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no better time to start than now, even if you ultimately don't feel that you're ready to now. If through working with the likes of George and his team, they look at the data and say, actually, we feel that you could do it based on these routes and this operation that you currently do. It's a way of gathering information. It's a way of potentially addressing the concerns you have. And it means that you're then in an informed position as to whether or not you can adopt electric vehicles into your fleet. Because I think if we'd have just gone off our gut prior to doing a pilot, we'd have still been saying, oh, well, probably not for us. It's probably not the right thing. But then because of the pilot, we're now in a position where we say, well, we believe we can. And it's a question of how far do we go and how soon. And so it changed the narrative. And that was on the back of the pilot, which really, really helped to address a lot of the skepticisms that we had as a business prior to. So I'd say there was absolutely no harm in doing that pilot. And at least then you were in an informed position as to how you progressed there on after.
Yeah, I would also just add, Rachel, that there's the OEMs really want this to work as well, which is great. So I think, John, it's fair to say the MAN team, we did it with the MAN 42-ton tractor unit, and they were brilliant throughout the process, arranging for the delivery of the truck, providing on-hand support and access to the telematic data throughout the trial. And I think there's another benefit of going early is you will get more on-hand support from people because they want it to work. It's direct customer feedback on the operations. We did it for that exact reason. VEV wanted to understand and work with a customer to see what it was like to operate in the real world, and obviously get all the energy and charging data, which informs our smart charging algorithms, which massively help with TCO. But the OEMs really, really want to see what people think of their trucks, and I think it's a really, really good time to reach out to them and start scoping out what your first wave of adoption looks like.
That's great, George. I think what I do is there's a question in the chat. I think if we do that, and then we'll come back round to our final few questions. But I think this is for you, George, because it's about buses and HGVs. So what are the biggest differences you have found between planning fleet transition for HGVs versus buses? Bus schedule data analysis is relatively straightforward since they have been fixed routes and timetables. HGVs are more variable.
I think, Martin, you've raised the biggest difference so far. It is unstructured. There is new jobs that HGV could be deployed on every day. What I found that's really interesting though is for trucks, if you don't look at it vehicle by vehicle, you look at it as the total amount of jobs that fleet might have to do. You might not find any vehicle which is perfect for EV. But if you look at every day of operations, you'll be able to join them together into an optimized EV schedule where that truck will be doing between 250 and 300 miles a day. It will be back to the depot at the right time for you to charge in off-peak hours. And that helps people see the true benefit of EV. It's not a direct swap out for HGVs. You want to kind of create the optimized EV schedule for that vehicle. And also, as I said earlier, prove as many different use cases as possible. I think that's the more interesting one, is you really want to understand the intricacies of the operation and then map EV's capabilities to the use cases that fleet does.
Thank you, George.
So I think we should also just go Sarah's point about TCO models being flawed as they don't consider social impacts or externalities is a really, really good one. I touched on driver a little bit, but it's the quietness of the cab, the lack of emissions is a massive difference. They report getting home and they aren't as tired. They have a better quality of life from driving these vehicles. Now that's mainly on vans. There is not as much driver data from trucks because they're relatively new to the market. But no, Sarah, I couldn't agree more. If you just look at the financial attributes, you are missing a really big picture of the story. Big part of the story. Sorry, that's not how that phrase goes.
Angie Martin's added in another question. Jonathan, you did, but you've said we've already answered it, so that's good. Would you say HGVs can have different charging strategies depending on the type of operation? Depot overnight only, opportunity only, hybrid approach. We have seen this with buses, such as an opportunity charging being used on intensive 24/7 services and airport shuttles.
Yeah, completely, Martin. It's a really good point. It's about speccing the right charging solution for the fleet as a whole. So if you only have a small number of routes that would require an out of depot charge, there is no point in electrifying that vehicle first, because the partner network and the public truck charging will improve dramatically over the next few years. So what was quite cool for one of our use cases with AV Dawson is we found a stagecoach depot with chargers that were more than suitable for a truck along one of their routes. So we looked at planning a charge and a stop off into that bus depot on the route as well, to see how feasible that was from an operational perspective. And I think it's an idea that AV Dawson can consider as they scale. They don't need to they don't need to wait for public charging to catch up to them. They can look at a private partner network, and then just in general, yeah, it's about mapping it to the right fleet. As much as you can push charging to match cheaper energy tariffs as possible, it's the best way to make TCO work. And one of the things that we are actively developing and currently have live at VEV is smart charging algorithms within our CPMS to optimize that energy cost as much as possible without pushing the impetus onto the fleet director, because they have more than enough to do with not only operating their diesel fleet, planning their EV fleet, planning their new EVs coming in and how they would scale. So wherever you can automate some optimization functionality in a back office, I think it's really important. So great, there's awareness of it. And I think the key thing to think of is solutions are starting to be made ahead of the time when fleets will need them.
That's a really good, and just to, not that I can add much on the technical aspects of what George has just said there, but one of the areas that we're looking to implement charging infrastructure is actually linked to solar. So we have solar on some of our buildings. We've just expanded a solar array on one of our fabrication halls. And now, during the day, in a lot of cases, certainly during the summer months, we're producing more energy than we consume, which is currently being sold back to the grid. But the rate that you sell it back to the grid, at least in our case now, is significantly lower than the rate you buy it from the grid at. So it makes sense for us to utilise that. And if we can link our charging infrastructure to that, and I know, George, you've already alluded to the renewables, and that brings down TCO further still, but that has almost the opportunity, once you've paid off the investment in the actual charging infrastructure, to effectively provide you free fuel, for want of a better expression. And just touching on George's point there about automating things so the fleet manager doesn't have to deal with it, completely agree. I mean, one thing I would say for certain is I am certainly not an energy expert, neither are any of the people within AV Dawson. So the more we can work with people to provide these solutions and smart solutions, which prevents one of us having to become that expert when we're on top of everything else that we try to do, but allows us to see the benefit, it really helps that adoption as well.
Absolutely fantastic, John. It's really good to hear. So we've got one more question from Sarah. I think this is a VEV question, John. Sorry.
Okay.
Does VEV include mobile charging solutions, containerized chargers within its charging strategies for HGV fleets, especially for those with depot power constraints?
Short answer, yes, Sarah. So we currently operate different battery buffered solutions. We didn't use one for the AV Dawson trial. We just used it was a mobile Heliox unit, which could just be plugged into a commando socket and provide 39 kilowatts of power, which was more than enough to fully charge the EV based on the charging windows we have. But yes, if we wanted to do an initial rollout and grid might not be available for another year, those battery-powered chargers are something that we can definitely deploy, and I think they're a great solution whenever grid is a limiting factor, because you can kind of model that DC charging if you had a vehicle coming back to the depot, wanted a rapid top up and go back out without needing the grid upgrade. And then they're also easier to move around your operations if you've got multiple depots after. So you can kind of wave one of vehicles with battery buffered solutions, wait for the grid to be upgraded, and then move it into a future depot. So I think it's a great solution when you've got the right use case for it.
Thank you, George. And so we're coming to close to the end. I just wanted to ask if there was anything, George, and then we'll come to you, John, about things you've heard in the customers that you really want, most important message that you would like to share here while we're on this webinar.
It's easier to get started than you think. I think there's a lot of, well, quite rightly, there's always a lot of uncertainty around new technologies. I think the thing that I've found most interesting over the last few years is to see the rate of improvement in all the required factors of production you would need to go EV, whether it's the trucks, whether it's the chargers, whether it's the back office, whether it's the support available from the OEMs or actors like us. I think for the majority of use cases, there is a solution out there. And then the only other thing, and I think is to echo John's point, and slightly to counteract myself, is while data analysis is really, really helpful, you'll learn a lot more from operating your first vehicle. And I think using data to get to that first stage earlier is probably the best advice I could give any fleet today.
Thank you. And the same question to you, John, if you've... Any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Well, I completely agree what George has just said there in terms of actually trial one. Use the data to get out and trial one, because you won't learn any more than you can by actually running one of those vehicles for a period of time. But one thing I would say, just as a sort of a final point that I don't think we've really touched on, is the reaction that we had from our customers throughout the pilot as well.
Nice.
And that has been absolutely huge, both during the pilot and afterwards. And people are very, very keen to understand what we are now doing on the back of having done that pilot scheme. And so there is, I think, a lot of people look at the costs, and we talk about sustainability, putting our sustainability hat on for a second. We talk about sustainability a lot of the time as a cost to a business. However, there's genuine opportunity out there as well for commercial gain. And by being a first mover, you can potentially steal some of that market share early on. Because especially when you think with some of these vehicles, there can be fairly long lead times. So the sooner that you're involved in that, and what we've found is a lot of our customers now, particularly the large ones who've made very big public pledges. And I know, Rachel, you mentioned really on about Scope 3, so I think you actually did touch on this. But some of our customers are now saying, well, unless you've got a plan for EV trucks or you are planning to adopt EV trucks, we wouldn't award a tender to you, no matter whether you tick all of the other criteria or not. So it's something that there's definitely a commercial driver to consider these as well moving forward, as well as it being a genuine, as well as all of the benefits and that we've talked throughout this webinar. So I'd just leave you with that thought as well.
Thank you. That's so wonderful. Thank you, John. And to you too, George. I'm just going to pop up on the screen our details so you can see them if they do come up. And say, most importantly, thank you for you all coming at lunchtime and sharing your lunch with us. And I thank you very much to John from AV Dawson for sharing all that, and for George from VEV. If there are any other further questions you have, just get in touch. Our email's on there, ask@vev.com. And that QR code will take you to the page on our website that has a lot more information about AV Dawson trial, the findings from that, the results, and the difference it made to the operation. So do go and have a look and get in touch if you want to discuss any of this further. George and John, I can easily put you in touch with anyone as well. So thank you again for sharing your lunch, and I wish you the wonderful afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone.